Have you ever wondered how far American car brands went in their obsession with luxury and innovation during the 1950s? Today, we're not talking about the classics that made history because they were perfect, but about those that, despite their beauty, turned into true mechanical disasters. Cars that promised to revolutionize the market and nearly destroyed the companies that built them. If you're a lover of classic cars, those machines that defined an era with all their excesses, mistakes, and charm, stay with us until the end. Because this list is going to surprise you. And while you're here, I invite you to do something that takes you only a second. But for this channel, means we can keep creating content with soul and memory. Leave a like if you ever dreamed of owning a classic American car, and subscribe if you want to keep exploring the best and the worst of automotive history. Get ready, because what you're about to see will make you think twice before idealizing any car with chrome fins and promises of glory. 1958 to 1960 Ford Edsel. Have you ever seen a car so ambitious that it ended up being its own downfall? That was the Ford Edsel, a legend of the 1950s, but for all the wrong reasons. When Ford launched it in 1957 with hopes of revolutionizing the market, it came with unprecedented media hype. Quite literally, the Edsel was announced as the car of the future. The problem? The future arrived, and it was a complete disaster. Imagine standing in a dealership in 1958. You open the door of a brand new Edsel, smell the fresh leather, feel the steering wheel with those strange buttons embedded right in the center, the famous tele-touch system. A futuristic idea, no doubt, control the automatic transmission from the center of the steering wheel. But in practice, the system failed more often than a compass in a magnetic field. Owners complained that if they accidentally touched the wrong button, the car would shift gears while in motion. In some cases, it didn't respond at all. And if that weren't enough, the Edsel's production was plagued by monumental internal disorganization. Ford poured over $250 million into its development, a colossal figure for the time, and the rush to launch it led to catastrophic assembly mistakes. Edsels left the factory with misaligned parts, oil leaks, and questionable build quality. Some even arrived at dealerships with poorly adapted components from other Ford models. For a brand carrying Henry Ford's legacy, it was almost sacrilegious. The Edsel's design didn't help either. Its front grille, supposedly inspired by a horse collar, became the target of ridicule and crude nicknames. Many referred to it as the automotive industry's toilet seat. Today, it might seem quirky, even appealing to some collectors. But at the time, it was simply considered ugly. And the most tragic part? Ford had created an entire division just for the Edsel. It was a car with its own identity, meant to compete between Mercury and Lincoln. But instead of dominating the market, the Edsel became synonymous with failure. In just 3 years, it was canceled. Less than half of the projected units were sold, and the word Edsel became etched in history as an example of how corporate arrogance, poor technical decisions, and sky-high expectations can crash hard against reality. Ironically, decades later, the Edsel became a cult object among collectors, precisely because of how disastrous it was. Just one more twist in this story of high hopes and a free-fall crash. 1957 to 1959, Chrysler Imperial. If the Ford Edsel was the loudest failure, the late 1950s Imperial was an elegant, silent, and dangerous warning. Imposing, opulent, technologically ambitious, and visually unbeatable, the Imperial was introduced as the crown jewel of Chrysler, designed to compete directly with the most luxurious Cadillacs of the era. But beneath that massive, gleaming hood hid a driving experience that, in many cases, bordered on traumatic. Let's start with the context. In 1957, Chrysler Corporation decided to give the Imperial its own identity, formally separating it from the Chrysler lineup and establishing it as an independent brand. A bold move, no doubt, but also a risky one. To set it apart, they loaded it with every technical innovation they had on hand. many of which were still in the experimental stage. And that's where the problems began. One of the Imperial's biggest promises was its sophisticated torsion air suspension, which used torsion bars instead of conventional springs. On paper, it offered a smoother ride, greater stability, and improved handling. In practice, it was a notoriously temperamental system. Many owners found out too late that the components would easily fall out of alignment, causing annoying noises, abrupt body roll during braking, and a floating sensation, but in the worst sense of the word. But not all the blame lay with the suspension. The hydraulic power steering system was another minefield. It would often stop responding without warning, especially when maneuvering at low speeds or parking. Now imagine trying to tame a car nearly 20 feet long and weighing over 2 tons without power steering. A true nightmare. And worst of all, the repairs were expensive, specialized, and often completely ineffective. The interior finish, despite the vehicle's high price tag, left much to be desired. Some customers received their Imperials with poorly fitted trim, peeling upholstery, or dashboards plagued by electrical issues. For a car meant to represent the pinnacle of luxury, these flaws were unforgivable. That said, the exterior design was breathtaking. Those razor-sharp tail fins, the precisely sculpted front end, but not everything that glitters is gold. The Imperial became a symbol of what happens when design outshines function, when excess outweighs the driver's experience. 1957 to 1958, Cadillac Eldorado Brougham. When Cadillac introduced this car in 1957, it did so with a single ambition: to create the most luxurious and technologically advanced automobile ever produced by the American industry, and in many ways, it succeeded. The Brougham wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a motorized work of art designed to outshine every rival and position itself even above the best European models of the time. But behind all that sophistication and glamour hid a difficult, temperamental, and extremely problematic machine. It was a hand-built automobile, literally. Each unit was assembled with surgical level detail, which drove its price to more than double that of a standard Cadillac. It came equipped with fine leather upholstery, polished stainless steel trim, a bar with magnetic glasses, an illuminated vanity mirror, and even a built-in exclusive perfume dispenser. Everything seemed straight out of a Hollywood fantasy, but as is often the case with fantasies, the reality turned out to be much harsher. The most troublesome feature was its revolutionary air suspension system, an innovation that promised a ride so smooth it would feel like floating. And yes, in its early days it worked with an almost surreal softness. But that smoothness didn't last long. The airbags lost pressure, valves failed, and compressors wore out prematurely. The result: Broughams began to sink slowly as if melting into the pavement. Many ended up dragging their chassis across the ground in the middle of the street. And that wasn't all. The electrical system, another engineering playground for Cadillac, was also riddled with issues. From power windows that refused to go up to automatic seats that moved on their own or got stuck in awkward positions. A painful irony for a car that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of comfort. And let's not even talk about the maintenance costs. Just finding a mechanic who knew how to work on that suspension was a challenge, and replacement parts were as expensive as they were hard to find. Even so, it's impossible to deny that the Brougham had a magnetic presence. Its design was unique. A brushed stainless steel roof, rear doors that opened without a center pillar, and lines that were elegant and aggressive at the same time. It was a Cadillac, but also an experiment. One that turned out to be so costly and problematic that the brand was forced to redesign its entire strategy for the following years. A curious fact: in 1958, production of the Brougham was transferred to the Pininfarina workshops in Italy, an American Cadillac, assembled by an Italian design house. An unheard-of collaboration that only adds more flavor to this already complex story. But not even the European touch could save the Brougham from its chronic issues. And now the question is for you. Knowing all of this, the flaws, the quirks, the history of mechanical headaches, would you still take the risk of having one in your garage? Would you give up logic in exchange for absolute luxury? Let us know your answer in the comments. We want to know who would truly live the dream, even if it comes with an emotional price tag. 1956 to 1958. Studebaker Golden Hawk. Rarely in automotive history has a car managed to divide opinion as much as the Golden Hawk did. At first glance, it looked like a chrome predator pulled straight out of the American dream. Sharp lines, prominent tail fins, a grille that seemed to defy all conventions, and that golden color that left no room for subtlety. Everything about it screamed power, rebellion, presence. But underneath that muscular body, what many found was something else. A car that was difficult, fragile, and unbalanced. To understand this model, we have to remember the context. In the mid-1950s, Studebaker, a brand with a rich legacy but increasingly pressured by Detroit's giants, needed a knockout move, something to put it back on the map. The solution? Create a car that combined bold design with wild performance. And thus, the Golden Hawk was born, equipped with a massive supercharged V8 engine derived from Packard that promised brutal power for its time, over 275 horsepower. But here's where the irony began. Though the engine was powerful, the body was too heavy, the chassis unfit for that kind of force, and the result was a car that accelerated well in a straight line, but struggled when braking, taking corners, or maintaining stability at high speeds. It had the heart of an athlete, but the body of a heavyweight, like a sprinter trapped in a suit of lead. And if that weren't enough, mechanical problems were constant. The cooling system was insufficient. The Golden Hawk overheated easily, especially in hot climates or during slow traffic. Some owners got used to driving with the hood slightly open just to let the engine breathe. Spare parts were hard to find and often wore out sooner than expected. Suspension, transmission, brakes, nearly every critical system showed flaws over time. Even so, it's impossible to ignore what the Golden Hawk represented. It was a bold gamble, a visual experiment ahead of its time that, however subtly, influenced the design of the muscle cars that would come later. It was aggressive, imposing, and challenged the conventional aesthetics of the 1950s, making it a cult object for the boldest enthusiasts. But the truth is that, as a daily driver, it was a nightmare. Many bought it enchanted by its rocket-like looks and ended up heartbroken after spending more time in the repair shop than on the road. 1955 to 1956, Packard Patrician. To talk about this car is, in a way, to talk about a sunset. Not just the end of a model, but the final farewell of a brand that, for decades, symbolized elegance, prestige, and refinement in the American automotive world. Packard wasn't just any name. It was synonymous with high society, quiet superiority, and impeccable craftsmanship. But in 1955 and 1956, that reputation began to crumble, and the Patrician, its most emblematic model, became the unwitting bearer of that downfall. By the mid-1950s, Packard was cornered. Competition was fierce, sales were dropping, and costs were rising. In a desperate attempt to survive, the company merged with Studebaker, another historic brand also facing trouble. The promise was a rebirth. The reality was a slow collapse. And the Patrician found itself trapped in the middle of that turbulence. Externally, the car still looked dignified. Its lines were restrained but imposing, with well-integrated chrome details and a design that still commanded a certain respect. But once you opened the door, started the engine, or drove a few miles, the illusion faded. Build quality had dropped dramatically. Careless assembly, interior rattles, misaligned components. It was as if each unit was an unfinished version of what it was meant to be. The electrical system was one of the most problematic areas. Starting failures, short circuits, flickering lights, or lights that simply stopped working. And the most painful part, many of these issues couldn't be easily fixed. Dealerships were poorly equipped to handle the new hybrid Packard Studebaker range, and customer service, once a proud hallmark of the brand, had become inconsistent. Owners' frustration was palpable. Many had chosen the Patrician because of what Packard represented, that legacy of excellence that seemed unshakable. But what they received was a car that, more than a status symbol, became a painful reminder of broken promises. It was as if the brand had aged overnight, losing the energy and precision that once made it great. And that hurts, because Packard wasn't just any company. It was the brand that, in its time, built some of the most refined automobiles on the planet. Cars that competed with Rolls-Royce and Mercedes-Benz, that carried presidents, tycoons, and artists. To see that legacy end with the Patrician, a car meant to lead a new era, but instead sealing the brand's fate, is, for many enthusiasts, an open wound in automotive history. 1950 to 1953. Buick Roadmaster. Saying Roadmaster is to pronounce a word with weight, with history, with that aura of greatness that only a few names in the automotive industry have managed to maintain. In the early years of the 1950s, the Buick Roadmaster was one of General Motors' most ambitious bets. A big, elegant car designed to turn heads on the boulevards of California or the avenues of Chicago. But beneath that long, shiny hood, what many owners discovered was a temperamental creature, demanding, sometimes even capricious. Visually, it was a work of art. The flowing lines, the low profile, the chrome bumpers, and that Buick emblem gleaming in the sun made anyone stop to admire it. The interior, for its part, was a rolling lounge, wraparound seats, a symmetrical dashboard, circular gauges with dark backgrounds, and wood or chrome trim depending on the year. It was pure American luxury, but just a few turns of the key were enough to start noticing that something wasn't quite right. The electrical systems were fragile, unpredictable. You could leave in the morning with all the lights working and return at night with half of them out for no apparent reason. Fuses would blow, contacts would rust, wiring would overheat. Added to this were the constant issues with the carburetor, which tended to go out of tune and caused hard starts, unstable idling, and in some cases, fuel consumption that could make a military truck blush. Then there were the hydraulic brakes, one of the biggest sources of complaints. With a car weighing over 2 tons, the brakes simply weren't up to the task. On long downhill stretches or during emergency stops, the pedal became spongy, unpredictable. More than one driver ended up learning to anticipate every movement in traffic to avoid relying on a braking system that inspired little confidence. All this made the Roadmaster a car that, while dazzling to watch as it passed by, demanded a patient and often frustrating relationship in day-to-day use. Its mechanics were unforgiving of mistakes or neglect. It needed frequent maintenance, attention to detail, and above all, a generous wallet. Because when something went wrong, and that happened relatively often, trips to the shop were neither cheap nor quick. Despite all these drawbacks, there is something about the Roadmaster that still captivates. Maybe it's its majestic silhouette, or the deep rumble of its engine at startup, or the way you sank into its seats as if entering a private movie theater. For many, it was the first great car of their lives, a symbol of success, albeit with the soul of a diva. And now we want to hear from you. Have you ever ridden in a Roadmaster? Or was it one of those cars you dreamed of owning until you found out about its flaws? Tell us in the comments, would the visual charm of this giant justify for you everything that came with it? Your story might just spark a memory in someone else here in the community. 1954, Kaiser Darrin. Sometimes, what seduces at first sight isn't what ends up winning you over in the long run. The Darrin, introduced in 1954, is the perfect example of how design can be as intoxicating as it is deceptive. It was the first American production car with a fiberglass body, and also the first to implement a sliding door system that retracted into the front fenders. In theory, it was all innovation. In practice, It was a story of frustration after frustration. The first thing that grabbed attention was its face. Literally. The Darrin had a grille shaped like a crooked smile, as if the car knew something you didn't. Its smooth, elegant curves made it look like it came straight out of a futuristic comic book. It was low, lightweight, and had the ideal proportions for a two-seater sports car. But once you tried to use it as a real car, the charm started to fall apart. The engine was a modest Willys putting out 90 horsepower. For a car with such a sporty appearance, it was like putting the heart of a moped in the body of a wildcat. On highways, it could barely keep up with traffic. On steep inclines, it struggled. Acceleration was slow, clumsy, and the sound of the engine didn't evoke excitement. It evoked pity. Anyone who bought a Darrin expecting adrenaline got a spoonful of resignation instead. But the worst part was the structural engineering. The pioneering use of fiberglass hadn't yet been perfected. The body creaked, flexed, and warped with heat or continuous use. The joints weakened, and in some cases, cracks appeared prematurely, and that oh-so-innovative sliding door system intended to ease access and add a futuristic touch quickly became a headache. They jammed easily, didn't seal properly against rain, and sometimes didn't even close correctly. Some owners had to push the doors with their knees while turning the handle, an undignified ritual for a car that claimed to represent the future. Kaiser only managed to produce 435 units before calling it quits. The brand couldn't compete with giants like Ford and Chevrolet, and although the Darrin was a brave attempt to redefine what was possible in automotive design, it ended up being a cautionary tale. Innovation without solid technical backing can turn into tragedy, and there you have them. 7 classic cars from the 1950s that, despite their imposing looks, became true headaches for their owners. Some promised limitless luxury, others aimed to redefine the future, but all shared one fate: disappointment. Now it's your turn. Which of these models surprised you the most? And which one, despite its flaws, would you still dare to have in your garage today? Your comment isn't just an opinion. It's a living part of this ongoing conversation between automotive history lovers. And if you enjoyed this trip through the dark side of the golden years, don't go just yet. We've got another video that will fascinate you, or maybe scandalize you: the ugliest cars of the 1950s. Click now, and we'll see you there. Because automotive history isn't told only through success, but also through unforgettable failures.